Well, good morning, everybody. It's the middle of the week. Hope it's going well for you, and you're also excited about being in church and worshiping Jesus Sunday, also being in the life group, but also that you're praying about inviting people. Who can you invite? Asking God to give you opportunities and for God to give you the eyes to see those people and the boldness to speak up and then ask people to come with you to worship in the life group this coming Sunday here at First Baptist. Today, for our devotion and in our Bible reading plan, we are starting the book of Exodus. We're in chapter 1, which really is a continuation of the stories that we've been reading in the book of Genesis. Last chapter of Genesis, yesterday, Jacob has died and been buried. Now Joseph is dead and he's been embalmed and buried, and their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on stay in Egypt and multiply. And in fact, as time passes and the memory of Joseph wanes, the leaders of Egypt become concerned because the Hebrew people are multiplying so rapidly. They're becoming a very large population. And it's not that they don't want the Hebrew people in Egypt. They do. Their concern is that if another nation declares war against Egypt and their army invades, that these Hebrews may join with the invading army, and that would result in the defeat of the Egyptian army. So what are they going to do? They don't want that to happen, and yet they don't want to lose the people. And the reason I say they didn't want to lose the people is because if their only concern was the Hebrews joining with an invading army, all they had to do was kick them out of the country. Okay, just expel them out of the country. That would have fixed that problem, but they didn't want to do that. Look at verses 8 and 9. It says, "Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we.'" They're really becoming populous. Verse 10, "Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us." But that wasn't the only issue. Look at the rest of the verse. "And depart from the land," that if another army comes in here and our nation falls, they'll leave. They didn't want them to leave. And this was before they made them slaves. I think it's because even though they were fearful that the Hebrew people might join with an invading army, they also realized that this population of people were having a tremendous impact on their nation's economy and health and infrastructure. Okay? So what are they going to do? That's when they came up with this two-pronged strategy. One is to gradually turn them into slaves. Secondly, execute the male babies, because those are the ones that are most likely to, join with the invading army. Hebrews slaves have as many girls as you want, but now, hey, we need to put a cap on the number of baby boys because that's where the risk is. And then, as slaves, when you read chapter 1, these Hebrew slaves became very significant in building buildings, construction, and in agriculture and crops in the fields and so on. And so that's what you read in this chapter. And the story of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, wanting the male boys killed, first by the midwives killing them at birth, or later throwing them into the Nile River is so inhumane and evil. But what I want you to understand is this was not as uncommon in the ancient world as you might imagine. Centuries later, closer to the time of Jesus, the Romans, for instance, it was not unheard of. In fact, it was somewhat, I don't want to say it was the norm, but it was common enough that it wasn't a shock to anyone that if a family had a child, especially if that child was a girl, especially if they already had a girl, didn't want a second girl, or if that child was born with a handicap or some kind of handicap or other problem, it was not unheard of for these Roman families to take that child and place them outside somewhere away from and let them die from exposure. Now, if another family came by, a person came by and saw that baby and said, I want to keep it and raise it, then they took it. But more often than not, that child was left out there to die from exposure. And it seems horrible to us, but again, that was more common than you might imagine. And they even used their religion, because throwing the babies into the Nile River was a form of sacrifice to their pagan gods. You were giving an offering. Throwing that baby in the river, that was an offering to the pagan gods of Egypt. And of course, the Nile River then and today was occupied by crocodiles, so you can imagine what would happen to these babies. Now, my devotional thought comes from verses 15 to 17. Let's read that together. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was Puah. And he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, if it's a boy, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God. The midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, let the boys live. And then as it goes on to say, when they were confronted about this, their excuse, what they said was, these Hebrew women are so vibrant and so vital and so strong. We get word that she's in labor, but because of how healthy they are, before we ever get there, they've already given birth, and then it's too late. We can't kill the baby as it's being born because it's already born. That's when they came up with the strategy of throwing them in the river. I love the way it says in verse 17 that these midwives, these women, feared God. They feared God more than they did the Pharaoh. They feared God more than they did the government. And I think it's in part because they knew that life was sacred. Remember in January, our memory verse for that month is Genesis 1:27. That God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he, God, created them. Abortion is not birth control. Abortion is not control over one's own body. Abortion is death. It is ending a life. It's ending the life of a person who is dependent on his mother, who helped create him, but she didn't create him alone. There's a father. And God is the one who designed us. Ending the life of one created in the image of God, because hear me, God's image is not God's image is not stamped on a child at birth. When that baby is out of the birth canal, God does not stamp that child with his image. That child bears the image of God when that man and woman together conceive a child. It's passed down from us, and it's there at conception. It is the taking of an innocent life. And just because a life is dependent on someone does not make it unworthy and does not justify killing it. And thus, abortion is a sin. I know it's a somber note to end on, but it's an important one for us to be reminded about. So that's it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. We look at Exodus chapter 2. God bless you, everybody.